The world of business has been rocked by allegations of misconduct by high-profile senior executives in recent years. This week, the chair of Tesco, John Allen, stepped down from one of the top jobs in British business following allegations just weeks after the Director General of the UK's biggest business organisation, the CBI, was sacked. Well, we're joined now by Baroness Martha Lane-Fox, who is President of the British Chambers of Commerce. Thank you so much for being on the programme. You've had such an extraordinary CV and career, not just President of the British Chambers of Commerce, but you're the Chair of WeTransfer, Non-Executive Director of Chanel, Chancellor of the Open University, a serial entrepreneur who set up lastminute.com. Absolutely great to have you on. Lots that I want to talk to you about. But if I may, just to start with what's happening when it comes to the culture in business at the minute, because we have seen these very high-profile allegations. Is there a problem with the behaviour of senior people in business in the UK?
That's a big question. Good morning, Sophie. Lovely to be here. I think for me, it's a couple of things. You know, we clearly have now got the ability to have conversations and raise issues that perhaps before we brushed under the carpet, you know, as women, as people who felt vulnerable, minorities, whatever it might be. I do think, however, I've got to be careful to separate very, very serious allegations of rape and sexual misconduct from what might be determined as behaviour in the office that may be inappropriate, might be old-fashioned, might be much more complex to unpick. So I just think it's important to separate those different things. But to me, it's a big shift from when I first started in business, and you couldn't even say if you thought somebody was being a bit tricky with you or a bit inappropriate.
I can imagine that it must have been a big shift. And you're right that we are much more able to call out behaviour that is inappropriate now than perhaps previously. I mean, as you say, you've been in business for many years and you've probably witnessed or experienced stuff over your time there. Very feel free to share any experiences, but I understand if not. Do you think things are improving?
I think they are on one level, and I can tell you thousands of funny stories. I think everybody has probably had a story or something happened to them. Every woman in business, you know, everything from when we started lastminute.com, an investor, the only investor that would see me and Brent, the co-founder, for a meeting about whether or not to invest in our business. The first question, which he directed at Brent, was what happens if me, gets pregnant, which still shocks me now, 25, 30 years later. But I hear stories all the time of other people suffering way worse things than that. You know, I've had people call out my clothes, how I look all the time. You know, it's endless, isn't it? But I do think it's shifted. I do think it's much more careful in most business environments. And I think that we just have to recognise that while people like me might still be very lucky and have the ability to say things are not quite right or call out somebody if they're bad behaviour, you know, we need to focus on the most vulnerable people in workplaces. If you're a contractor in a cleaning company working nights from a minority, I don't know whether power feels as though it's different for you. So I think it's really important we think about the whole spectrum of people who work and, as always, look after and protect the most vulnerable.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, actually. And it is easy for women in high-profile positions to talk about things getting better. Is it getting better for the people who don't have the loudest voices, I think is the question, as you say, that we do need to keep asking. Exactly. There's been all sorts of allegations around the CBI, and I think you're right to say that it's important to say that there's a range of allegations here. Do you think that organisation is now finished?
You know, I don't know, and nobody wants to dance on another organisation's grave, especially when there have been some reports of bad behaviour. You know, what I would say is that at this moment in time, it's incredibly important to have the voice of business effectively talking into government. You know, I'm President of the British Chambers of Commerce, as you said. We're a 160-year-old organisation with members from local communities, represented at a national level and global network as well. And we had our conference this week on Wednesday, and we had the Chancellor there, we had the Governor of the Bank of England, we had Keir Starmer. So we are there, we are carrying on doing our job. And so the voice of business is being represented into government, and we feel really strongly that pre-election, with so much happening in the economy, that the government of all shades and of all sides are listening to what business has to say and their concerns about the next 18 months, 2 years.
What is your number one message to the government?
I think I'm going to be cheeky and kind of say two things. I think, firstly, it's incredibly important that government recognises business feels uncertain. Businesses are not looking ahead and thinking, "Yep, the economy feels robust. and yup, I feel confident in the political situation. As we've seen repeatedly, and all the data shows, whether it's data about business confidence, whether it's data about actual investment, businesses are waiting. They're kind of feeling a bit uncertain and holding back, and that's bad. We need business to feel confident, to feel as though there is stability, to feel as though they know what the shape of the next 2 years is going to be like so that they can invest. That's fundamental. The second thing is around the people's crisis that we have in this country. We don't have enough people for the jobs that we want to do. We've got a million people who have vacancies in their business. It's the single biggest thing that I hear from talking to businesses all over the country in my role at British Chambers of Commerce. It's unbelievably complicated to find some people in some sectors, to then retain them, to retrain them, and so on. So I really do think it's a people's crisis, and I hope that the government and the opposition parties are listening to that, because it's the thing that people come back to again and again when I'm travelling around talking to businesses across the country.
It's really interesting to hear what you describe as a people's crisis at a time when there's a lot of focus on net migration figures out next week. Rishi Sunak says he wants them to come down. On this show a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to the former Bank of England chief economist, Andy Haldane, who said that actually the government needs to alleviate some of those pressures through skilled, controlled migrant labour. Do you think he's right, that actually we need to embrace more immigration to try and fill some of those gaps?
I 100% do, and I think the businesses that we represent in the Chamber Network would say the same thing. We have some of the frameworks there already. We've got the frameworks around short-term contracting work for specially skilled jobs. They need to be expanded, ramped up, scaled up, and we won't be able to power up the economy in the way that I think is possible in this country if we don't have the people both in our country and outside our country. It's got to be both. It can't be one or the other. And if we shrink and we become closed, it's not going to be good for any of us, not for consumers, not for business leaders. It's really important that we address this incredible gap in skills that we have.
Is it made worse after leaving the European Union?
I think so, yes. I think it would be very tricky to argue that this has become an issue that we've sorted out internally, and I don't want to give the impression that anybody that I talk to believes we shouldn't be training up and working hard to make sure that the people in this country have the skills we need as well. They do need to happen in parallel. We need to make sure we've got skilled workers from overseas. We also need to make sure that we're helping our own citizens and employees become as skilled as possible. I'm also a Chancellor of the Open University. I see this time and time again how people are using that organisation to skill up in their work and move on in their careers. And it's vital that we have dual track in this in order to address the enormous challenges that we face over the next decade.
It's interesting you mentioned the universities there as well, because it does feel that this is another part of the political debate about whether the rules should be tightened on international students and the time that they can stay in the UK after finishing a course. Do you think that's something the government could look at?
Sorry, you slightly cut out there, Sophie, so I hope I'm answering the right question. But I heard you talk about universities, and I agree. I think we also think at the Open University that it's super important that we keep open and bring in people to study and keep that richness of our Open University, but also the wider university network. We just don't want to become a closed country. Whatever you feel about the Brexit debate, I think that it's really important that Britain still feels as though it's a place that has these centres of excellence, that is encouraging people from all over the world to come in and out of our country, to see the incredible university network that we have and use it and feel part of it, because that's an incredible soft power that we'll have over the world when we keep those borders open. So from every angle, I think we would argue that for all the institutions that I'm lucky enough to represent, that an open Britain is a very important player on the world stage. We mustn't become too closed.
Politics is already kind of gearing up for an election next year, and it feels like there's a bit of a tussle between Labour and the Conservatives over who is the party for business. Who do you think is coming out on top at the minute?
I think it was ever thus. I mean, I think the great thing is that both parties are talking actively about business and the importance of engaging with businesses. 30% of the people in this country work in businesses. They fuel our economy. We're not going to have any of the ability to deliver services and the things that we want to do if we don't have a robust economy, and that's driven by business. So it was fantastic that both Keir Starmer and Jeremy Hunt and Andrew Bailey were at our conference at the BCC on Wednesday. All of them are talking about the importance of business. Everybody's talking about growth. As always, we want to see the action behind that. We want to feel as though it's not just noise, but it's also followed through with action. As I talked about, making that business environment feel certain, making sure that we've got the skills we need, helping businesses trade internationally and so forth. There's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen as well as the rhetoric. But the first point is clearly to make sure that parties are listening and engaging, and that's 100% happening.